Keith Vaz resigns as chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee. Amid allegations of involvement with male prostitutes, he told fellow MPs those who hold others to account must themselves be accountable.
He gave a very frank account of what had happened, and he told us of his intention to resign.
Stand side by side!
Also tonight, Anjem Choudhury, jailed for pledging allegiance to the so-called Islamic State, could be out in less than 3 years.
Sports Direct offer better treatment of their staff ahead of a shareholder grilling. Critics say it's not enough.
And Paralympic pride. Dressage rider Lee Pearson will carry the flag at tomorrow's opening ceremony in Rio.
This is the ITV Evening News with Alistair Stewart and Mary Nightingale.
Good evening. A master of the cutting question and the put-down, Keith Vaz quietly fell on his sword today. Accusations about rent boys and drugs are distracting, he said, from the work of the Home Affairs Select Committee and made his position as chair untenable. Those, he said, who hold others to account must themselves be accountable.
The allegations surfaced in a Sunday newspaper. At a private meeting with fellow MPs this afternoon, he admitted the scandal meant he could not continue. Our political correspondent Carl Dinnan reports.
When Keith Vaz left home this morning, he was still one of the most powerful backbench MPs in Parliament, but not for much longer. In a private meeting, he told the rest of the Home Affairs Committee he was resigning and recommended that the senior Conservative member take over as interim chairman.
The committee listened, I think in sadness, to what Keith had to say, and with a good deal of respect. Keith has clearly acted in the best interests of the Home Affairs Select Committee and the important work that we do.
That work was at risk of being overshadowed by a third day of newspaper headlines alleging Mr Vaz had paid 2 male escorts for sex and had offered to pay for cocaine. In a statement today, Mr Vaz said those who hold others to account must themselves be accountable. I told the committee today of my decision to stand aside immediately from committee business and my intention to resign. This is my decision and mine alone, and my first consideration has been the effect of recent events on my family. Keith Vaz chaired the Home Affairs Committee with some style.
You're not Sherlock Holmes, are you?
But it is their job to examine the government's approach to drugs and prostitution, so the allegations created a conflict of interest.
He didn't, and we don't want any perceived or actual conflicts of interest to dominate every single inquiry that the Home Affairs Select Committee is doing. And if we want to ensure that the issue related to the inquiry is the issue and not any perceived conflicts, then that is what drove Keith to step down.
This is not the first time Mr Vaz's career has been tainted by the whiff of scandal, but until now he has always managed to recover. As he left the House of Commons chamber this afternoon, it was not clear whether he could again.
Well, answer your own question then. Is it career over, Carl, for Keith Vaz?
Well, he's still an MP, of course, Alistair, and he sits on Labour's powerful ruling National Executive Committee. Now, he didn't want to appear on camera today, but I did manage to grab a word with him outside that committee hearing, and he said he wasn't thinking of resigning from Labour's National Executive. Actually, he seemed in a surprisingly good mood, given everything that's happened to him over the last few days. He's not quite out of the woods. The Parliamentary Standards Committee will be looking at this, as will the Charity Commission be looking at aspects of this affair. So this story could still run on a bit longer, but Keith Vaz has bounced back before, and he could yet surprise us again.
Carl, thank you.
The hate preacher Anjem Choudhury was finally silenced today, jailed for 5.5 years for drumming up support for Islamic State. A judge said he had showed contempt for British values. But Choudhury could be out on the streets again in less than 3 years. And tonight, one of his supporters has told ITV News that his ideology will live on. Juliet Bremner reports.
Stand side by side with him, with the Dawood!
The preaching of hate-filled sermons on the pavements of Britain started decades ago. The law seemed powerless to stop Anjem Chowdhury's rants. Until today, when he and his deputy were finally jailed for 5.5 years.
We've gone back over 20 years worth of material. Chowdhury and Rahman are very clever individuals, and for many, many years have always tried to remain, in their eyes, the right line of the law. But in relation to this case, they have actually strayed over that line and committed terrorist offences.
The 49-year-old was convicted of supporting so-called Islamic State. But because of time already spent in prison, he and Musna Rahman will only serve slightly more than 2 years in jail. Although Anjem Chowdhury's voice may now be silenced, his supporters, or acolytes as the judge called them, were determined to have the last word. They stood up in the public gallery as he was being led away and shouted in unison, Allahu Akbar. Chowdhury surrounds himself with impressionable young people. Many insist they will stay true to his beliefs.
The only issue is who's going to fill his shoes, because it's a big shoe to fill. He was very outstanding in the community. But at the end of the day, the call that Islam will still be dominant.
Chowdhury is expected to be sent back to Belmarsh. He's likely to be in solitary confinement to prevent him radicalising other prisoners. But an imam who's worked in high-security jails for 10 years warns he'll still be a potential danger.
Having Anjem Chowdhury in prison is a huge challenge, problem. He's going to be an absolute magnet. Maybe hero worship, maybe even adored by some of these criminal-minded people.
There were no words of remorse from either man. The judge concluded that Anjem Chowdhury had only contempt for the democratic country in which he lived. Juliet Bremner, ITV News.
Sport Direct's pledge to end its controversial working practices do not go far enough, a senior MP said today. The majority shareholder in the company, billionaire Mike Ashley, says it will offer casual staff guaranteed hours and end the 6 strikes and you're out rule.
But the chair of the Commons Business Committee wants more action, and it hasn't placated angry shareholders, as our business editor Joel Hills reports.
There's a Sports Direct on every high street. The business holds sway online. But MPs have accused the owner of running the company like a Victorian workhouse and exploiting workers to maximise profits. Mike Ashley wants to be seen as a caring employer, but today a review of working conditions he commissioned found serious shortcomings at Sports Direct's warehouse in Derbyshire.
Jackets and vests, guys.
Now change is coming, thanks in part to an undercover investigation by The Guardian.
All the women who are scared to go to toilet when it's not your break time, or take a glass of water when it's not your break time, take sick day when you're ill.
Sports Direct says it will end its 6 strikes and you're out disciplinary policy. Offences included eating in the warehouse, excessive chatting and long toilet breaks. In the company's shops, 18,000 staff are currently employed on 0-hour contracts. All will be offered the option of a permanent role, guaranteeing at least 12 hours a week. But the 3,600 warehouse staff will remain on agency contracts.
Do you accept that the company was effectively paying workers below the minimum wage?
On that specific point, for that specific bit of time, yes.
3 months ago, Mike Ashley admitted to MPs that Sports Direct had broken the law. Staff have since had a pay rise, but the chair of the select committee that questioned Ashley told me today that the billionaire hasn't done enough to address his concerns.
Let's not open the champagne just yet. What about the 4,000 workers in the Shirebrook warehouse? Why can't they be offered permanent contracts too?
The abuses at Sports Direct's warehouse have upset politicians and shareholders who are expected to vote against the re-election of directors at the company's annual general meeting tomorrow.
Ultimately, the issue is cultural change. They need to undergo major cultural change, and that starts at the top, and we think that begins with the chairman. So we're looking for the chairman to resign and for the company to put in place a new chairman.
It is very rare for investors to call publicly for heads to roll, but they probably won't. Mike Ashley opened the first Sports Direct shop in 1982. Today, he still owns 55% of the company, which gives him effective control. But while a shareholder rebellion cannot force Mike Ashley's hand, it is likely to cause him significant embarrassment. And it won't help the company's share price, which has slumped over the last year.
Joel, thank you.
Two 15-year-olds have admitted killing a mother and daughter, but they denied murdering them. Elizabeth Edwards and her 13-year-old daughter Katie were found dead at a house in Spalding in April. The boy and girl, who can't be named because of their age, denied murder in court, but they did admit manslaughter. A trial is expected to begin in October.
A taxi driver accused of murdering a woman missing since 2003 told a police officer he was sick as he confessed to killing her. Court heard that Christopher Halliwell then took police to where Becky Godden's remains had been buried before asking if it was too late to get help. From Bristol Crown Court, Rupert Evelyn reports.
Strangled and buried in a clandestine shallow grave, Becky Godden was only found because the man accused of her murder took police to find her body. It was 8 years since she'd last been seen alive when in 2011 police excavations revealed the skeleton hidden in a Gloucestershire field. Christopher Halliwell denies killing the 20-year-old, but as the case opened, the jury were told that the defendant, a man who's chosen not to have legal representation, had previously admitted to a crime for which he is already serving a life sentence. In 2011, Sian O'Callaghan vanished in Swindon. Halliwell was arrested and took police to her body. And while there, the court heard he then revealed information about a dead sex worker, Becky Godden. Having located Sian's body, the prosecution claim Halliwell said to Detective Superintendent Steve Fulcher, "We need to have a chat." The policeman listened as Halliwell asked, "Is it too late to get help?" And then allegedly said, "There's another one," meaning another body. The policeman asked him, was it a similar sort of circumstance? To which the minicab driver is said to have replied, "Pretty much." The judge told jurors that they were only told of Sian O'Callaghan's murder because there are similarities with Becky Godden's death. But he warned the jury that it would be wholly wrong to assume that Halliwell is guilty of Becky's murder. The prosecution say there's not a shred or slither of doubt that Halliwell killed Becky Godden. Halliwell denies this and will in due course get his chance to defend himself. Rupert Evelyn, ITV News, Bristol.
Still to come on the ITV Evening News, caught on camera. Does this document reveal government plans for new grammar schools?
And flying the flag with pride, the Paralympian taking centre stage at the opening ceremony in Rio.
I just feel like I'm leading the best team in the world.
Those stories and more after the break.
Welcome back. Government plans to open new grammar schools in England appear to have been caught on camera. A document that suggests expanding selective schools was photographed in Downing Street shortly before a cabinet meeting this morning. Our deputy political editor Chris Shipp is in Downing Street for us tonight. So Chris, what can we read into this then?
Well, Mary, you don't get much more of a divisive issue, certainly in education, than the one about grammar schools. So state schools who select their pupils at the age of 11 based on an exam. Now, if you know your history, you'll know Labour banned new grammar schools in 1998, but grammar school girl Theresa May in here is widely thought to want them reintroduced, or at least the ban lifted on new grammar schools. So today there was cabinet here in Downing Street. All the usual faces, David Davis, Boris Johnson, all arrived for cabinet, but among those arriving here was an official carrying a document from the most senior civil servant at the Department of Education. Now, not for the first time here in Downing Street, that document was photographed by one of the photographers here, and it said this: the consultation document says we will open new grammars, albeit that they will have to follow various conditions. It goes on to say we'd like to open them provided we can prove that they don't just help the middle class classes who can afford the houses and the tutors for the exams to get their sons and daughters in. Now, one of the teaching unions said today that this whole idea of bringing back grammar schools is taking us back to an education system in the 1950s.
This is a real distraction. It's backward looking, it wasn't in the Tories manifesto, and it's a complete distraction from the real issues facing our schools. There are funding cuts, class sizes are going up, arts, dance, drama subjects are being cut because of those funding cuts.
So it's quite clear what we learned today is Theresa May wants to do this. The big question is, can she get it through Parliament? She'd have to get all of her Tory MPs to vote for it because Labour, the Lib Dems and the SNP wouldn't. The big problem she has, though, however, Mary, is getting it through the House of Lords, who are unlikely to support a return to selective education.
Chris Shipp in Downing Street, thank you.
Nicola Sturgeon's laid out the Scottish Government's plans for the next year, focusing on boosting the country's economy following the Brexit vote. The First Minister pledged funds for education and infrastructure. She also promised legislation for a second independence referendum if Scottish ministers decide leaving the UK is the best way to protect links with the EU.
There has been a major breach of security at London City Airport, which caused delays and cancellations for thousands of passengers. 9 protesters claiming to be from the Black Lives Matter campaign were arrested after blocking the runway for 6 hours.
Meanwhile, British Airways has apologised to its passengers after an IT glitch in the check-in system caused hours of delays in the UK across Europe and the rest of the world. The airline says the problem has now been fixed. The World Health Organization's significantly toughened up its advice over the Zika virus. It is now warning both men and women not to have unprotected sex for 6 months after returning from an infected area. Our health editor, Rachel Younger, joins us live. This advice goes much further than before. What's changed?
Yes, it does. That 6-month safety net had been in place anyway since June for men who were showing any symptoms of the virus. Now it applies to both men and women, whether or not they're showing symptoms. Now, the association between Zika and microcephaly has been known about since last autumn, when we first began to see the very distressing pictures of babies suffering with undersized heads and brains. What's changed now is the number of cases of Zika believed to have been caused by sexual transmission. You may remember this time last year, we thought it could only be transmitted by the Aedes mosquito. But in the last few months, the total number of reported cases believed to have been caused by sexual transmission is 11 different countries. So the hard evidence on how long the virus actually remains in bodily fluids is limited. But it's enough of a concern for the World Health Organization to have changed its guidance. And that advice may well have an effect, particularly on Olympians and Paralympians and their families coming back from Rio.
Indeed. Rachel, thank you.
And finally, Lee Pearson, one of our most decorated Paralympians, has been chosen to fly the flag for Britain in the Games opening ceremony. It all starts in just over a day's time, and Lee will be looking to add to his tally of 10 gold medals in dressage.
And as Richard Pallet reports from Rio, the team as a whole are hoping to achieve even more success than they did in London.
This is what 10 Paralympic golds gets you. The honour of being the British flag bearer at the opening ceremony. Lee Pearson has repeatedly triumphed in para-dressage at the last 4 games, despite being allergic to horses. Because of muscle wastage in his arms and legs, he was unable to ride a bike as he wished, so decided to jump on something else instead.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
His next challenge, how to enter the stadium tomorrow night.
I might roll, yeah. I don't know if I'm going to walk because I'm petrified of letting people down and dropping the flag or tripping over. So I'm looking forward to the whole opening ceremony, but I just feel like I'm leading the best team in the world.
He'll be the figurehead for 263 teammates, a British squad brimming with confidence and believing that they will beat their London haul of 120 medals.
You think you can do better than London?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the target. It's a 1-2-1 target. We're not shying away from that target, but we're also being, I guess, very realistic in terms of standards in Paralympic sport have gone up.
Athletically, maybe. Organisationally and financially, most certainly not. Venues have been closed due to lack of funding, while the last-minute preparations continue. Just a fortnight ago, the head of the Paralympics said that these games were in complete crisis.
but thanks to the sports-mad Brazilian people, more than 1.5 million tickets have now been sold, and they're on track to outstrip even Beijing, if not quite London.
I think we were very worried 2 weeks ago.
But the enforced alterations since should allow the sport to flourish once again, and so too the athletes.
The press conference of 2 weeks ago was probably the best rocket up the backside ever, because it's brought all the parties together. We've brought funding in, we've made some cuts, but we've all worked together as a team, and we're really confident now that we're going to deliver a great Games.
Rio's challenge over the next 10 days is to ensure that the enthusiasm continues. Then these games will be remembered in their own right, and not as some afterthought to follow the Olympics. Richard Pallo, ITV News, Rio de Janeiro.
I think Lee Pearson should ride into the arena,
Carrying
waving that
Brilliant,
flag.
yeah.
Fantastic news. That is it from us. Tom Bradbury will be here with the news at 10.
From all the team, have a very good evening. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.